Talofa ni, I'm Alice Lolohea and welcome back to another episode of The Pacific.
E ka moe omo, I'm Johnson Raela. Let's check out what's coming up on the show.
Nuclear fallout. We hear from survivors in Marshall Islands 40 years after they lost their home forever.
Wa Whaafetai serenades the US president.
And legendary Pacific journalist Sean Dorney reflects on PNG's upcoming 50th independence anniversary.
First though, tributes are still flowing across the Pacific after Pope Francis died aged 88 in Rome. Let's bring in Alice now because he was hugely popular in our region, especially after his historic visit to PNG in Timor-Leste last year.
That's right, Johns. As leaders and people around the world commemorate his life and legacy, Christians in the Pacific fondly remember his 2024 trip. Travelling over 19,000 kilometres from the Vatican, the furthest he'd ever been from the seat of St. Peter, Pope Francis's visit to Papua New Guinea last year would mark the third time the country had welcomed a pope.
Seeing Pope Francis coming to my country, PNG, a poor country, for me it's something significant, and it's like a father who cares for his children.
He made the rest of the world realize that there are people like the Catholic Church and Christians in other parts of the world who are dying to have somebody like him come out and spread the message of Christ.
Vigils were also held in Timor-Leste, where the Pope visited after his stop in Papua New Guinea. Timor-Leste is the most densely concentrated Catholic population outside the Vatican, with over 97% of Timorese counting themselves as part of the Church.
I feel very sad because I feel like the Pope is my king. He came here less than a year ago. I feel like the Pope is not dead. I am shocked and can't accept reality.
I come here as a young man, as a Catholic, and feel so sad to hear our Father, Pope Francis, has died. As human beings, we feel these emotions. That's why we are here, to express our condolences to the Pope.
Adopting the name of the patron saint of the poor, the Pope became the first Francis of the papal line. Much of his papacy focused on the peripheries of the Church, the poor, the marginalised, and the faithful in hard-to-reach places.
He was driven by God's love, the living presence of God in him, to come and visit our people, visit Vanimo, visit Port Moresby.
He also championed Indigenous rights and protections, highlighting Indigenous peoples' essential role in the fight against climate change. Pope Francis also inherited a divided church. Supporters of his conservative predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, railed against his relaxation of communion laws for divorcees, his support for the rainbow community, and his inclusion of women in higher roles within the Vatican. But he was also celebrated by many for his progressive views on these issues.
When I went with the bishops in 2023 for the Adlimina visit, and I was the first woman to be given that opportunity to sit with the bishops, because it's traditionally only for the men, is very important and special to me.
I know we are losing yet another great world leader in a time of great turmoil, in a time of huge deficit in world leadership.
The Church now looks for its new shepherd, and the College of Cardinals will soon descend on Rome to vote in the conclave, the election of the Pope.
I think what we need should be a Pope which is not more conservative as well as more progressive, but somebody will be neutral in order to keep the Church going in that direction.
Cardinal John Ribat was installed during the early years of Pope Francis's papacy. This will be his first time to vote for a new pontiff.
To be able to have a representative from here to be in the conclave, the important thing is that, Papua New Guinea is part of the church, the global church.
For more on the Pope's passing, we're going to catch up with our reporters in the region where the Pontiff recently visited. First, let's go to Timor-Leste, where Vanya Vieira is standing by in Dili at Lasidier Park, where mourners are gathering to pray and sing songs. Hola, diakalai Vanya.
Hola, Monjos, how diak? Obrigada.
Now, we've just heard from people in Timor-Leste about how much the Pope meant to them, and he obviously made that historic trip last year. What was it about Pope Francis's message that resonated with people in Timor?
So Timorese people see the Pope Francis who has a charisma and a simple person, embrace people with a deep sense of affection. So when Pope Francis visited Timor-Leste last year, most people in Timor were glad with the presence of Pope Francis in Timor-Leste. They believe that Pope can bring blessing and grace to all Timor-Leste people in here, not only for the people, Catholic people, but for including the marginalized group and other minority religion in Timor-Leste. So one message that given by Pope Francis in Timor-Leste last year, he says, "I'm falling in love to Timor-Leste and you are unique." These words make a people feeling blessing and special gift from the God that Pope Francis bring to Timor-Leste last year. And most people is like us was happy and crying because the Pope Francis is like unique and special for people in Timor.
Vanya, obrigado ba itania tempo.
Obrigada, Mount Jones.
And in Papua New Guinea, Belinda Kora is standing by. Hello, thank you, lo kambonga mipla again lo displa show bells.
Thank you very much, Johnson. Greetings from Port Moresby.
Now, Belinda, it's been a few days, but how are people in PNG reacting to the Pontiff's death?
Yes, Johnson, here in Port Moresby and mainly around the country, you can imagine the overwhelming atmosphere and reaction of extreme sadness amongst many of the Christians and Catholics, more specifically, closing at an estimate of at least 2 million here in Papua New Guinea. A lot of them have expressed sadness. A lot of them are on Facebook doing that, especially on their Facebook and their social media. And many of them have also expressed that they have lost someone that they have dearly seen as Santu Papa in Tokpisin, as someone who a spiritual leader whom they have respected for many years. So yes, Johnson, many young and old, women and children, and especially the youths are quite sad at this time.
Now, we heard earlier from Cardinal John Rubat that the Pope had a great love for PNG. Why do you think that was?
Yes, I did cover the Pope's visit for the ABC last year in September, and it was reflective of the Pope in most of his speeches and his meets with certain individuals and, of course, groups within the city and outside while he was traveling and journeying here. A lot of people had come up to me and asked, why did Pope want to visit Papua New Guinea of all other countries in the Asia-Pacific region? And so they saw that as a very special decision by the Pope himself, and he expressed that the message of unity, the message of love, the message of peace amongst the people in a very unique country here in the Pacific, more than 800 languages, but they must speak as one voice, as the Pope had said in his big mass at the stadium located here in Port Moresby. He expressed his love for such a country with such diversity and uniqueness, and how we are able to all come together through one faith. And that is something that a lot of Catholics and a lot of Christians had admired of the Pope when he visited and touched the lives of many here in Papua New Guinea.
Bells, thank you, lo time blow you.
Thank you, Steret Lobungi Milo, here too. Bye.
In 1954, Marshall Islands had already endured 7 years of American nuclear tests, but the biggest was yet to come. On the 1st of March, the massive Castle Bravo bomb test on Bikini Atoll unleashed a new wave of horror for the people of Rongelap Atoll. After being exposed to radioactive fallout, the impacts are still being felt today, and the Rongalapese were only saved when the Greenpeace boat Rainbow Warrior relocated them. Decades later, the ship is back to meet with those it rescued. The story was produced with the help of James Nokise and Chewy Lin in Majuro. It's a long-awaited return for Greenpeace's Rainbow Warrior. The iconic ship is back in Marshall Islands, 40 years after the original evacuated the people of Rongelap to Majeto Island.
I was here when the Rainbow Warrior arrived, and my dad, I remember him saying, you know, we're going to a new place that, you know, we're not familiar with, so we have to, you know, like gather our strength, you know, be strong.
Grace Arbon was only a child when her life on Rongelap was uprooted, all because of a toxic nuclear legacy, the true impact of which we're only beginning to understand today. Between 1946 and 1958, the US conducted 67 nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands, including the 1954 Castle Bravo bomb detonated at Bikini Atoll. It remains the most powerful nuclear device ever detonated by the United States, 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima. Severe radiation spread over hundreds of kilometres, including over the nearby Rongelap Atoll, a mere 120 kilometres from the detonation. People there were unknowingly exposed to deadly radioactivity.
It is now known that fallout from the larger Castle shots blanketed areas of more than 5,000 square miles with radioactive material that would have been lethal to unprotected personnel.
Virtually all of them suffered from severe radiation sickness, including vomiting, burning eyes, and swelling of the neck, arms, and legs.
A majority of those receiving the heaviest radiation reported some transient nausea. Some loss of hair was a frequent symptom.
Despite knowing the dangers, the US didn't evacuate the atoll's residents until 2 days after the fallout. 3 years later, the people of Rongelap were allowed to return home. But US authorities knew it wasn't safe. Confidential memos later revealed the atoll was the most contaminated place on Earth. And the US Atomic Energy Commission labelled Rongelap a natural laboratory, saying the habitation of these people on the island will afford most valuable ecological radiation data on human beings. For the next 30 years, Rongalapese developed high rates of thyroid cancer, leukemia, and other radiation-related illnesses. Women suffered miscarriages and birth defects. By 1985, the people of Rongelap had had enough. After repeated requests to the US for assistance fell on deaf ears, Greenpeace came to help evacuate them to Majeto.
Everyone on the island was delighted Greenpeace were here to take them away. For 30 years they'd waited for this moment. Those who decided to evacuate were to be taken to another island about 150 kilometers away. They included one young boy whose deformities have been blamed on the 1954 nuclear test.
It was the last voyage of the Rainbow Warrior before it was notoriously bombed by French intelligence services in New Zealand later that year.
One member of the environmental group died in the blast aboard the vessel.
Over the last 4 decades, Rongelap people have moved to America and across the Marshall Islands, but around 100 Rongalapese have settled here in a place dubbed Rongi Town on Majeto Atoll.
Our life for the Rongelap people today, I can say, not good.
Evelyn Ralpho says her people dream of going home.
For the older folks, they have a hope before they leave this earth that they will go back home. My mom keeps on saying that she wants to go back. She actually wanted to be buried there. But unfortunately, she was not. It's hard to move there, bring her there, but we want to be able to roam around Rongelap and remember and feel the stories of our grandparents, our mother, our parents, talking about how beautiful Rongelap was. And I want my kids to see where their mother, their grandparents are from. So you move from your island, it's hard to live in places that you feel like an outsider. You feel, even though this is the Marshall Islands, we're all Marshallese, but it's hard. It's a struggle still until now.
Evelyn has served on the Marshall Islands National Nuclear Commission, set up to tackle the painful legacy of nuclear testing, which many here say the US has never fully addressed.
The Compact of Free Association that you've negotiated is an excellent document. It is the key to self-sufficiency and economic independence.
In part because of the health and environmental issues caused by nuclear testing. The Marshall Islands and the US government formalized a Compact of Free Association deal in 1986. The deal gave the US military strategic control in exchange for economic assistance, free entry for Marshallese citizens into America, and granted the islands independence after decades of US administration. But today, Marshallese communities still want the US to fully address the devastating impacts that linger decades after the tests ended.
Despite these wrongs, for almost 80 years, we have not received an official apology. There has been no meaningful reconciliation, and we continue to seek redress.
The impact of the nuclear legacy for Rongelap community, one of them is obviously displacement of the community, and they're like dispersed all over the Marshall Islands. So it has been very hard for the community. They lost their freedom, they lost their identity.
Grace says that while Greenpeace saved her and her family, she's still counting the losses.
I left Rongelap in 1985. I remember my dad, he just went in and salvaged whatever he could because we didn't have enough time. He was here, so he salvaged whatever he could to bring it to Majato for the temporary housing. I remember my grandmother, when Rainbow Warrior came, we went on the third trip because it was hard for her to leave. And for me, of course, I didn't understand. I was young, but I didn't know the impact it would have on me later on. It was really sad, and I finally got to understand that I will never ever go back to my island, and that was really sad.
In September last year, the Marshall Islands and the US signed a renewed Compact of Free Association, a 20-year deal worth nearly $2.3 billion, which tries to address some of the broken promises, including $700 million specifically targeted at nuclear-affected communities. But for many, the impacts are immeasurable, and President Hilda Heine says the Marshallese are still waiting for justice.
We did not choose this nuclear fate. It was chosen for us.
Let's go back to Alisi now, because many of us are familiar with the Samoan gratitude song Ua Whaawhitai. But who knew President Trump would like it?
Yes, everyone, you heard that correctly, because it's not often you see Pacific Islanders in the White House, but an American Samoan delegation claimed a win on a recent visit where they serenaded President Donald Trump, all in the name of food security. President Trump was presented with an ulafala, usually bestowed on chiefs.
Signifies royalty in our culture.
So does that mean I'm royalty?
You are royalty.
It was the culmination of an American Samoan lobbying effort to overturn protections in one of the world's largest ocean reserves. The Pacific Islands Heritage Marine National Monument is an area the size of 3 Californias, home to fragile ecosystems and endangered wildlife. Rolling back protections opens the door to commercial fishing around several US-controlled islands and atolls in the Central Pacific, which Trump hopes will make America a seafood powerhouse.
Thank you so much for your awesome leadership in giving back to American Samoa what had been taken away from us without even consulting with our leaders and people at that time.
The sanctuary was established under the Bush administration and expanded by President Obama, considered a historic act of environmentalism at the time. But it also locked American Samoans out of nearby fisheries.
It's so horrible and so stupid. It's so stupid. We're talking about a massive ocean, and they're forced to travel 4 to 7 days to go and fish.
Environmentalists were blindsided and shocked by the news. Marine biologist at the University of Hawaii, Dr. Bob Richmond, says these sanctuaries are like marine bank accounts earning interest.
What is important is to understand what the value of these large-scale marine protected areas like the Pacific Island Heritage Monument is a way of generating more fish for sustainability and for the future, especially in a world of climate change, what's really affecting the Pacific fisheries in the big picture.
Scientists and international bodies agree 30% of the world's oceans need protecting, but currently only 3% are.
How do we ensure that people can meet their economic needs today, like the people of American Samoa, but also ensure that they're not compromising the ability of future generations to be able to benefit from ocean resources as well?
President Trump looks poised to further upend the status quo governing the Pacific Ocean, with reports the administration is considering an executive order to start mining critical minerals from the ocean bed. 32 countries are calling for a moratorium on deep-sea mining in international waters, an effort led by Pacific Island nations.
There are data that demonstrate concerns about what deep seabed mining can do to fisheries, to ecosystem health, and by definition, to human health as well.
Okay, to something special now, because in September this year, Papua New Guinea marks 50 years of independence.
And to celebrate, the ABC and the National Broadcasting Corporation of Papua New Guinea have come together to create a special series, including a multi-platform 1-hour documentary.
The series begins with legendary broadcaster Sean Dorney, who actually started out on loan to the NBC before becoming one of ABC's longest-serving correspondents in Papua New Guinea.
The militants they terrorised for Papua New Guinea government. Storm surges been based in Bougainville. Finding riches. 20 years at the helm. Sean Dorney in Rabaul. Sean Dorney on Manus Island. Sean Dorney, Port Moresby. I spent 3 terrific years actually up there working for the NBC and ended up playing for the national side for 2 years, and on my last appearance captaining the Comores, which was an extraordinary thing for someone who wasn't even a citizen of the country. And the best thing I ever did in my entire life was meet this one here. My wife, Pauline, I took an immediate interest in her, which for some time she did not reciprocate. But eventually, I broke her down, and we ended up getting married in 1976, and we've got 2 kids and now 3 fabulous grandkids. So it's been a wonderful relationship, and Pauline's been an absolute tower of strength. As a journalist, being there in those years leading up to independence and then immediately after, that was when I was working for the NBC. I just found it to be just an absolutely, bewildering but fascinating and interesting place. There was a real sense of expectation and hope. It was, a very, very exciting time, and I got to travel around, the country with some of the leaders. I got to know Michael Samari and Julius Chan, Yimbaki Okuk. I don't think I met one of those significant Papua New Guinean leaders who I didn't like. I, got to know Michael Somare really well. His political party, the Pangu Party, was relatively strong, but when you think of it in Australian terms, the Pangu Party never had more than about 1/4 or 1/5 of the seats. So putting together governments in Papua New Guinea requires an enormous amount of coordination and urging and talking to other leaders, and putting coalitions together is something that Somare was, a master at.
It was confusing, actually. I don't think a lot of people really understood just what independence was about, and I think there was a lot of apprehension about the country, this time.
Oh, there was a real reluctance from many of the Highlands provinces to move that rapidly to independence, because the Highlands was opened up, to the outside world much later than the coastal areas. The most memorable was covering changes of government, but also I suppose some of the big stories that I covered up here involved natural disasters. I got up to cover the volcanic eruption in Raela, which was just absolutely extraordinary. 36 hours of violent volcanic activity has left most of Raela covered by a thick layer of ash. The tsunami that hit Itapi, near the border with Irian Jaya, was caused enormous devastation. You could see that people who had lost not only lives of their loved ones, but everything else as well had just been swept away. It's got enormous natural resources, Papua New Guinea, and one of the greatest natural resources it's got, of course, are its people. It is just so diverse. It's just, I think the most interesting place on earth.
That's our show. Whaapitaitele lava for joining us. Catch up on all our stories and news from across the region on ABC Pacific's social platforms.
Mā te wā.